Riot Chapter 3. Hey, you punks, the guard bellowed. Get back here. Their bike tire rolled over the pavement. Brian raced past the stop sign, spun around the corner, and turned right into Highway 11, heading toward the center of town. His lungs burned, but he gripped his handlebars tightly and pedaled faster. Kyle sped behind him. When they were half a mile away, Brian slowed down until he and Kyle rode side by side. We hit the guardhouse, Brian said, struggling to catch his breath. I can't believe it. We actually hit it. Kyle lifted one hand from his handlebar and flung his stones into the ditch. Brian glanced at Kyle. You mean you didn't throw any? Kyle shook his head. What if that guard caught us? He would have pounded us. What's the point? Why couldn't you just go along with it? No one got hurt or anything, Brian said in annoyance. And it was just for fun, he added, aware it was somehow more than that. Usually Brian and Kyle thought the same way about everything. They both loved watermelon, tortilla chips, and hot sauce, biking and hockey. They even had the same favorite book, Hatchet. They biked past the high school track field. Hey, Brian said, maybe you don't get it because your parents didn't grow up here. Kyle's parents were from Grand Rapids, a few hours away, and they went back there lots of weekends to visit. Look, my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents are all from here. So? Kyle screwed up his face, clearly not getting Brian's point. Oh, forget it. Maybe you'll never get it. Kyle looked straight ahead. No, he said, his voice shaky. I don't get it. Kyle was usually lots of fun, the class joker. He was trying to make Brian feel guilty? Actually, Brian felt good about what he'd done. Until now, the most daring thing he'd ever risked was toilet papering the Statson's house on Halloween last year, but he and Kyle had gotten caught in the act. They'd spent the following Sunday on ladders, removing every white speck from the limbs. Kyle hadn't minded. It was a chance to get close to Laura Statson, whom Kyle had loved passionately back then. Now he'd forgotten she even existed. Brian adjusted his backpack strap, which was cutting into his shoulder. He didn't know why he had nailed the guard's building. Not exactly, but it felt good. Really good. Like slamming a surprise shot into the opponent's net. Besides, if the guard had caught him, Brian knew Dad would have understood. Still, Brian hated when he and Kyle disagreed. To shift the talk away from the guard at the housing camp, Brian told Kyle about the girl at church and how she'd smiled at him. The boys pedaled past stores and banks and the paper mill, and the American and Canadian flags flying at the end of Main Street. They rumbled over shipping yard railroad tracks and passed under a 3-foot round pipe that ran from enormous wood chip piles to the mill. The pipe wheezed, sucked in chips like a giant vacuum cleaner. A loaded logging truck roared past them. From its longest log, a red ribbon whipped in the wind. This girl, Kyle said, did she smile a little, or was it a great big smile? I said she smiled, Brian told him. Just a smile. It's no big deal, really. Right. Look straight at me and say that, said Kyle, his sun-bleached eyebrows arching. On the bike trail, the boys passed the pulpwood storage yard, where tree-length logs were stacked as far as Brian could see, stockpiled to be made into paper. Beyond that, the shipyard was filled with what resembled a giant's toys, pipes and bolts and boxes and cylinders of every color, building parts for the Goliath paper machine. In Grand Rapids, Kyle commented, the mill has gardens surrounding it. It's pretty. Oh, Brian said, well, this wasn't Grand Rapids. 10 minutes later, they turned at the 20-foot statue of the Voyager, an early fur trader who traveled the northern lakes and rivers by canoe. At the beach, they locked their 10-speeds on the metal rack. Brian breathed in the water-scented air. 3 miles from the mill, the air smelled fresher. All the tension in town seemed to be left behind for a while. Come on, let's go, Brian said, walking toward the lake. Dozens of kids and parents were spread out on the stretch of sand, a haze hanging in the air over them. Under an arching pavilion, a family gathered. The sand beach radiated a wave of heat. The lifeguard, a short and muscular, climbed the steps of the purple and gold-painted platform. Last day, she called as the boys scattered seagulls on their ways to the dock. Brian took off his backpack, set it on the weathered boards, and pulled out a small black video camera. He was glad Mom had finally agreed to let him take it to the beach so he and Kyle could tape the dives they worked on all summer. Since she had gotten it last Christmas, she'd guarded it like a diamond. It's for capturing moments with my most valuable jewels, she said, kissing him on the cheek. Mom, he groaned. She was like that. Here's the plan, Brian said. You dive, I shoot. I dive, you shoot me. Really? Sounds dangerous. Kyle's face was unflinching. Brian tilted his head. You know what I mean. By late morning, Brian had nearly perfected his back dive, and his forward one and a half one. He stood on the edge of the diving platform, looking back at Kyle, who held the camera. This one, Kyle announced, executed with tremendous skill, will undoubtedly qualify Mr. Grant for the Olympics. Yeah, right, Brian said. He bent his knees, swept his arms low, and then brought them upward. As he did, he caught a sight of the girl with the apricot hair, wearing a turquoise swimsuit, stepping wide around the sunbather. She was walking down the dock, coming closer. Folks, Kyle announced, he's losing all his concentration. Kyle, Brian whispered loudly, that's her. Her isn't her, Kyle said, turning his head slightly. She's coming down the dock. Brian started teetering on the edge of the board. He dug his toes in, swung his arms in wide circles, but started falling, and with his arms and feet pointed skyward, torpedoed into a mighty backflop. Slap. He went under and contemplating swimming under the dock and hiding, but he didn't. In the brisk water, he surfaced, skin stinging, and wiped water from his eyes. He stretched out his arms and floated on his back. He didn't feel like getting out. When he looked up, the girl was at the end of the diving platform. Brian couldn't believe this. Could this be happening for him? Could y'all move out of the way? Y'all? Brian looked around. Nobody from Minnesota says y'all. With a sick feeling, he realized that she was probably here with Baggett Construction. His heart sank. He couldn't let himself like her. He couldn't. Dad would kill him. Brian breaststroked to the ladder and started climbing, and stopped halfway and turned and watched. The girl walked to the edge of the board. Looking down at her feet, she positioned her heels over the edge, her calves round and muscular. In one fluid motion, she pressed her arms down, reaching up and set the perfect T, then arched into a graceful back dive. Gliding through the air, she cut into the dark water, leaving a string of sparkling beads behind her. Brian could hardly breathe. Not only was she pretty, but she could dive. She surfaced, brushed water from her eyes, and swam toward him. Hey, I saw you at church, she said, smiling. You were leaving early. Before he could say a word, Kyle stepped toward the ladder, focusing the video camera on the girl. Now that was great, he said. Nice dive. Brian climbed onto the gray-weathered dock. He already made a fool of himself by hanging back, staring again. She probably thought he was a brainless geek by now. He turned and watched her. Thanks, she said, wet bangs in her eyes. She dipped her head back in the water and lifted it out again. This water's freezing. What's your name? Kyle said. His dimples deepened, his blonde hair catching the sun. Brian glared at him. Kyle just blurted it out, asking her name. Why did he just go ahead and tell her that he was the popular class clown, and that he and Brian were the best on their hockey team? Kyle wasn't exactly Mr. Bashful. Chelsea, she said, climbing the ladder, goosebumps rising on her arms. Chelsea Redding. She waved the camera away. Don't. Brian looked from the girl to Kyle, who held the video camera on his shoulder, still filming. Brian's tongue was a thick balloon of cotton. I'm Kyle, and this is... Suddenly, swearing bulleted the air. Brian spun toward the shore. A tangle of teenagers rolled toward them. Down the dock, cursing, fists swinging. Stupid rat! One kid in jeans shouted, why don't you just go home? Chelsea stood on the dock. Oh no! She wrapped her arms around her waist as though she were suddenly ill. A boy not much older than Brian, wearing blue swim trunks and white sneakers, fell out of the circle and onto his elbow. Laughter pelted the air. The boy scrambled to his feet and flailed at the other boys with his arms. His punches looked pathetic. Grabbing the boy by the wrists and ankles, two teenagers lifted him off the dock. Let me go, the boy shouted, twisting. The lifeguard blew her shrill whistle. The teenagers ran awkwardly with the boy down the dock, nearly bowling Brian over, and began swinging him back and forth over the edge. 1, 2, I can't swim. Let him go, Chelsea yelled. He can't swim. Yeah, right, one of the teenagers said. 3. Flying through the air, the boy flipped and smacked the water with his stomach, and then disappeared below the surface, like a skipping stone. The lifeguard's whistle shrieked 3 times. Howling, the teenage boys took off down the dock. Brian glanced from the water to the lifeguard. She was hurrying down her platform ladder. Almost everybody in Minnesota knew how to swim. That kid was old enough to know how. She was wasting her time. Where is he? Kyle said. Brian scanned the dark, rippling water. I don't know. Gasping, the boy shot up for air, sputtering and wheezing. Help! He choked out, thrashing like an injured bird. He dipped below the surface again. At the shore end of the dock, one of the boys, taunting, blocked the lifeguard's path. Hey, Leah, want to go out Friday? Out of my way, she yelled. Brian looked back, worried that the boy had gone under. It would be risky to jump in to rescue someone. He'd be putting his own life in danger. But if he waited much longer, the lifeguard might not be able to find the boy in the water, nearly as dark as root beer. He watched the rippled surface. The kid was gone. Brian's heart beat harder. Somebody help him, Chelsea screamed. Where is he? Brian scanned the water, the edge of the dock, the shore. Wasn't the kid going to surface again? He disappeared so fast. Brian couldn't stand back and watch. He plunged in.